we're at this interesting juncture where the majority of people who hold the power and are powerful decision makers, either they get this and don't want to admit it, or they don't get it, or they don't want to get it because to get it means to integrate a really inconvenient and uncomfortable truth on how things need to be sort of redone. How many of you, when you talk about or reflected on the history of narcissistic abuse you experienced, particularly if it happened when you were a kid, how many of you were told that that really bad treatment you received was good for you? Let's take that on. Can really feel galling to hear someone say that something that hurt you so bad could have been good for you. Because again, drop in the comments how many of you have been hurt or been told that all the meanness, cruelty, awfulness, or even abuse of a narcissistic relationship, that it was somehow good for you. It's terrible to consider, but yes, some people, they believe it, they certainly say it, that the abuse of a narcissistic relationship, things like, well, you're still standing, so it couldn't have been that bad for you, or, oh, come on, it wasn't that bad for you, it gave you a stronger back, a thicker skin, it gave you character. I call BS on that. I don't think there is ever a scenario in which being invalidated, manipulated, or gaslighted is good. I just don't. It doesn't build character. There are far better ways to build resilience that don't involve breaking down someone's soul and leaving us full of self-blame. And suffering, obviously, and any existentialist will tell you that, suffering can certainly be harnessed to learn from, but I don't think that anyone needs to suffer to become a fully formed person. This "it was good for you" model is often bandied about in situations in which a person experienced childhood narcissistic abuse from parents. And interestingly, especially, let's say you're doing well as an adult, you're succeeding in your job or in school, you'd hear things like, well, it couldn't have been that bad, you're doing just fine. I think that this definitely falls under gaslighting and feels like a gaslighting maneuver. There are many reasons a person may be just fine in adulthood despite having experienced narcissistic abuse, including still jumping through hoops in a futile attempt to try and win over that narcissistic parent, or having had to figure stuff out on your own to survive, which is very inefficient, but it's still, at the same time, still having to bear the burden of the skittishness, the vigilance, the confusion, the self-doubt, the trauma bonding that keeps you stuck in other relationships. Framing something that harmed you psychologically as being a good thing, it's not okay. You may have learned from it, but there were other ways to get those lessons. There is a prevailing wisdom out there that all childhoods were difficult, and having a narcissistic parent is just one version of a difficult childhood. Frankly, first of all, I don't believe that. And also, I don't think difficult childhoods do anyone any favors. Is any of it avoidable? Probably not. Narcissistic people will continue having children. The mental health system will continue not addressing it. And so unless a child is experiencing physical harm or what we consider reportable abuse, I'm confident these cycles won't end, and this cycle is actually why shrinks are going to be in business forever. Now, as we come out of the shock and awe of the holiday season, which is when we originally made this video, too much family time just unfolded for a lot of folks, and having to replicate and face down these family narcissistic cycles that you may have been able to deny for a good part of the rest of the year, you may have actually heard this sentiment from your family that, oh, don't bring up the bad stuff from the past, it was good for you. It's revisionist, and it is invalidating to hear this at any age. Listen, some of your parents may have rationalized it to themselves at the time. Sure, I'm hard on her, but it's good for her. Yeah, he went through a lot with his dad, but it made him the man he is. Yes, it did. And that is not a good thing. Narcissistic relationships, especially from parents, leave us with some tough scars that never fully heal. Challenges with close relationships, self-doubt that holds us back in careers, anxiety, underestimating and undervaluing ourselves, selling ourselves short. None of this is good. Yes, we may have become survivalists, but I'm not sure that that's a good thing. If someone does say this to you, it kind of goes back to that conventional wisdom I've shared on this YouTube channel in the past of, should I call a narcissistic person out? And my answer to that is always going to be a resounding no. So telling them, in the same vein, telling them that, like, no, what you did to me did not make me stronger or tougher. And just because other people go through this, or this is how it was in other generations, doesn't make it okay. It's frankly a meaningless discourse to get into with someone who's harmed you, and them trying to spin a feel-good story about how your adversity shaped you is part of their system of denial and rationalization. The fact is, they aren't listening to you anyhow, so having this conversation with them, pointless. Over the years, as I have worked with clients who got stronger, who became parents themselves, and think to themselves, oh God, what happened in my family of origin? I couldn't do this to my kids. But also sometimes found themselves falling into some of the toxic patterns of their parents. Parenting after you've experienced narcissistic abuse as a child can always feel like a battle zone. As I said, there will always be narcissistic parents, and there's no policy in the world that will change that. The best I can hope for is to get knowledge out there so folks early enough in their lives so they not only don't blame themselves for their parents' mistakes, but may be able to address them in a way that ends intergenerational cycles. I am personally witnessing a lot of folks who endured narcissistic abuse as children who are doing a really, really great job with their kids and ending these cycles. We may be able to learn and grow through suffering, but there's definitely a smoother path up that mountain that you didn't get to take. And someone trying to gloss over that painful path as being good for you, well, that's just straight up manipulation. I was recently talking to a group of people where there's a mix of folks, some who really went through it tough as kids and others didn't. And I was thinking to myself, like, the people, and I knew them well, and the people who had been through narcissistic abuse as kids in that group, I was thinking, like, if anyone ever said, pick the team you want to take into the jungle or the desert to survive with, no brainer. It was the survivors of narcissistic abuse. There was definitely an adaptability I saw there that the other folks, maybe a little bit too soft, wouldn't be able to do it. If you ever were to go in the fires of hell, I would definitely be really good at that. But that survivalist mindset can be a little tricky, because just as people who've been through this often do build up some really strong survivalist skills, the vigilance, the awareness, the figuring out all the exits, as it were, all the paths forward. That kind of heightened awareness also gets taken into life when it doesn't need to be so survivalist. And a lot of bandwidth goes to that. Don't tell me that was necessarily good for us. Okay, sure. Because most days I am not trying to survive in a hostile climate. I'm just trying to live my life. That survivalist mentality, not so sure that it necessarily is always doing me a favor, but give me a call if I'm ever stuck in the jungle. I'm sure it's going to do me just fine. How do we spend time with folks who haven't been through narcissistic abuse themselves? If you have any thoughts on that question, drop them in the comments. How do you do it? How does that work out for you when you're spending time with folks, and now that you've been through it, what does that feel like? Have you ever had the experience of sharing your experience of a narcissistic relationship with someone who hasn't been through it, and then you get sort of a blank stare back? What does that feel like? Because for lots of people, it can take the shame and the isolation of the narcissistic relationship and make it feel so much worse. And just as a brief aside, this video gets at stuff that is very relevant to healing, but there's limits on what you can do in terms of healing on a YouTube channel. If you want a much more robust deep dive into healing, hit that link in the video notes. Would love to have you join us for the healing program I have, which is a monthly program, but just a thought on that. So let's talk about that. This idea, though. It's not as simple. It's not as simple as to divide the world into three camps, right? The narcissistic folks, the people who have survived narcissistic abuse, and the people who have not been through it. I know there's a sense in survivors of, now that I get it, I don't know how to be with or hang out with people who don't. And there are a few reasons for this, so let's break this down a little bit. First, within the world of people who haven't been through that, through narcissistic abuse, we can really further divide them into two groups. There are those who have been through it, but they actually don't realize they've been through it. And those who actually have never been through it. Now let's go, that first group is tricky, because in that group, there may be enablers, or they may be people who are in such denial that they will deny your experience. The second group is tricky because they simply do not have a template for this. And in a way, they come from a place of what I call psychological privilege. These are the people who won the human lottery. They were born into a family surrounded by love and encouragement and support and consistency and safety and freedom from abuse. That actually does happen for some people. These two groups, though, are different. The ones who are going through it but aren't aware, they have the risk of really minimizing what a survivor is going through because they want to protect their own narrative, because that's how denial works, right? So they're acting like their relationship is good, but you can see that their relationship is toxic. It can actually kind of feel a little bit triggering for you to watch someone else get narcissistically abused. I find it very unsettling to watch other people get narcissistically abused. And then that person, though, may actually turn around and tell you that, well, maybe you read your own situation wrong. It can feel enabling. It can feel messy. So those folks are not always going to be good for you, especially in the acute stages of healing. The other group, the psychologically privileged ones, that group gets interesting. I do know a few people like this, not many, but a few. Life just worked out for them. They had the luck of having parents who loved each other, the luck of having enough resources so that the family wasn't stressed out about money, the luck of having two parents who weren't narcissistic or dependent or enablers or just checked out, the luck of having decent or loving siblings, the luck of good health, the luck of finding a loving, non-narcissistic supportive partner, the luck of having healthy children. Luck! Lots of luck. These are often, can be nice people, just nice people. They better be, after all, the way everything's kind of gone their way, right? But they literally do not have the chip in their brain that allows them to process this ugly mess of narcissism and what it does to people. They often hold hope for change in others. They may have very optimistic outlooks. They may believe in justice and the fundamental premise that life is fair. Your psychologically privileged friends may listen, they may be kind, they may do nice things with you, for you, but ultimately they're just not going to get it. It's foreign to them. It doesn't compute. It's unique about narcissistic abuse. As a result, many survivors may feel a sense of shame or even a mild sense of dissociation when they are around people who have actually not been through narcissistic abuse. Survivors of narcissistic abuse often carry this sort of strange, unwanted burden of being truth tellers. After experiencing really toxic relationships, survivors of narcissistic abuse become sort of living proof of how badly people can treat each other. And when you are around people who simply haven't seen or experienced this, it can create friction, tension, and discomfort. In simplest terms, people who have survived narcissistic abuse are reluctant walking monuments to injustice, reminders that life is glaringly unfair, that bad guys win, good folks lose, and the karmic scales don't always equal out, and that we live in a society that keeps enabling, emboldening, and cheering the antagonistic and manipulative folks on. That said, these folks who haven't been through it, they may try to meet you halfway. Bless them, they may. And they may not shame you or blame you, but both of you silently come to the understanding that you've been through something that they fully won't get. A truly empathic person will do their best to meet someone where they are at. And in that way, you can still navigate these friendships. If, however, there's still a lot of head scratching from them and are you suring and benefit of the doubting, take a gentle step back. Maintain those boundaries, because such friendships may evoke shame, especially at times of vulnerability. And if you are a psychologically privileged person and just happen to be watching this video, please just make sure you hold space for folks who have been through this. I hope it doesn't happen to you. Empathy doesn't require having been through something the same as someone else. It simply requires holding space for another person's experience, respecting it, and never doubting it, simply because you want to preserve your version of reality. Love means being present with another person's uncomfortable experience, and to do so with acceptance, even if it's at odds with your worldview and what you believe to be true about the world. Sadly, with each passing day, the community of folks who have survived at least one significant narcissistic relationship grows. So you are in good company if you're in the survivors of narcissistic abuse group. I'm actually sitting here, and as I'm thinking about this video, I just was randomly going through the people in my own life. And I was thinking, it kind of comes down to 50% yes and 50% no in terms of who have been through narcissistic abuse. And in that 50% of people in my life who have been through it, 50% of them get it, and 50% of them don't. So only 25% of people I know who've been through it get it. Survivorship is a process, and as you get stronger, you will feel a bit more steadfast in the midst of the folks who haven't been through it or who don't get it. You will feel more clear in your experience. You'll hold your ground, work through the shame, and have more solid boundaries. But all of us, even survivors who are 30, 40, 50 years in, will find that there are moments of sadness, weakness, setbacks, vulnerability, when those boundaries need to be higher. Survivors of narcissistic abuse carry a lifelong legacy of having to be their own protectors going forward, of having to gatekeep and be discerning and watchful, to set boundaries and take the time we need, to not throw caution to the wind. It's not a luxury that survivors have. More people in your life than not don't fully understand narcissistic abuse, so this can feel like a lonely process and at times bring up shame. But take a minute. Look at the comments of this or any other video. They're a reminder that you aren't alone. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about narcissism and power, and very specifically, we're going to be talking about the danger that comes out of people who are in positions of power when they don't understand narcissism. Now, I firmly believe that a big reason that the world is the toxic mess that it is these days is because the people who are in positions of power simply do not understand narcissism or don't want to. And in that way, the decisions and the policies that run our world reflect that lack of knowledge. Who are these powerful people who don't understand narcissism? Lawyers, judges, politicians, CEOs, managers, other leaders of all kinds of organizations, corporations, universities, schools, hospitals, nonprofit organizations, small businesses, big businesses. When the people in charge don't get it, their decisions, which affect other people, often don't reflect an understanding of the basic truths of narcissism. And what are those basic truths? This is a pattern that doesn't really change. People who are like this will not integrate second chances into their decision making. They will not take responsibility for their behavior. Narcissistic people will lash out at other people if they are called out. Especially they will lash out at people who are more vulnerable to them. Narcissism does real harm to the people who are experiencing it. And guess what, leader? You are not going to be the exception to the rule. Now, There are many reasons for why people in positions of power don't get narcissism. The people in these positions of authority may not get it because it hasn't happened to them, or it hasn't happened to them in a long time. These powerful people may be grandiose or narcissistic themselves. They may have the protection and the luxury of privilege and systems that have always worked for them. So they make the erroneous assumption that the world that works for them will work for everyone else. And ultimately, nobody likes having their illusions shattered and their little castles in the sky dismantled. And when narcissism and the destruction that it leaves in its wake comes into their world, these powerful people like to fall back into easy breezy. Well, I'm sure we can all find a way to get along kind of platitudes because it works for them. Or, I'm sure we can find a solution. No, sometimes we can't find a solution. This is a real problem when that person in power has decision-making power. So let's break down a few scenarios to give you some context. Here's one. The first one would be a person who works in the family court system who doesn't understand narcissism. To me, this may be the most glaring example because the ramifications around this ruin people's lives. When judges and attorneys and custody evaluators don't get this, then you have children being placed in situations that may be unhealthy for them. And then you also have people who are being drawn through degrading, humiliating, and dehumanizing divorces in the processes of the court. Attorneys who don't get it and don't understand that a malignant narcissist would actually have no problem at all leaving their ex-spouse homeless may not guide their client in an optimal manner. Suggesting a mediation that a narcissistic person will run roughshod over, or not recognizing the sinister things that someone would do to someone they once claimed to love, means that a person can get really bad advice from someone who gets it, and this bad advice can plague someone and their children for a lifetime. In these situations, a non-narcissistic or healthier spouse can be branded as a problem or difficult, because narcissists are able to charm and charisma their way through courtrooms. These narcissistic divorces, make no mistake, they're definitely a headache for an already overburdened family court system. And they, in some ways, must hold out hope, the court system holds out hope, that the non-narcissistic partner will just capitulate to the demands of the narcissistic partner. The second is in a workplace setting. Human resource departments, management, and other leadership who don't understand narcissism may allow a toxic employee to just run all over and railroad coworkers, and may just sort of say, well, maybe everything here's a misunderstanding, and then offer up some kind of nonsensical and anemic workshop with a mediator or an online training that doesn't understand narcissism to address a manipulative, gaslighting colleague or leader. They will issue empty warnings, and goodness help you if you say that you believe your colleague or your boss is narcissistic, because then they're going to take you aside and lecture you on using such a clinical word. And because narcissists are so good at flying under the radar, their transgressions may not be enough to warrant meaningful disciplinary action. And because narcissistic people are so good at playing and validating and fluffing the leadership, the narcissist in a workplace may be viewed as the golden child by the leadership. This can result in a sense of helplessness and hopelessness, and frankly, ultimately, a critical mass of healthy people may leave a workplace, leaving only the narcissists and their enablers. Working under these conditions is like one of those bad dreams where you feel like you are screaming at the top of your lungs and no noise is coming out. A third example would be in an educational setting. In an educational setting, it may mean having an abusive mentor or a teacher that plays favorites. Students are traditionally a very disempowered group because teachers have so much power in terms of evaluation and even recommendation. Many times, a difficult teacher may persist in a system. And since students are afraid to complain, the teachers may actually get job security year over year, and then may very well emotionally beat up new generations of students. Because administration often doesn't closely watch every single teacher in every single classroom, and may not understand what narcissistic behavior means in an educator, they may just frame it as, they're just a no-nonsense teacher. And because the students have no voice, these cycles can persist. And for some students, one really toxic teacher can significantly impact their educational path forever. Number 4, in politics. Let's face it, the majority of politicians are narcissistic on both sides of the aisle. I'm not being partisan. So they may not ever, politicians are never going to get it. They may view the grandstanding, the manipulation, the future faked empty promises as the nature of politics. Sadly, though, the power of politicians to make really important decisions about budgetary appropriations, health, education, taxes, the stuff that affects our daily lives, and then the politicians not being able to see the shady, manipulative gaslighters in their midst, means that there are literally no checks and balances. The politicians will often keep lining the pockets of their validators, their big donors, and the rest of us are left unserved. A 5th is in corporations. Listen, again, we know this now from the research. A significant number of CEOs and corporate leaders are narcissistic. It's how they climbed up the corporate ladder. The challenge becomes that this all results in abusive corporate policies that can result in harm to consumers and to the people who work there. Because regulators at the governmental level also do not understand narcissism, or because the governmental regulators are basically flying monkeys and enablers, they will believe the empty promises that the corporate types would give them. The lack of empathy in these corporate spaces means that leaders in these corporate spaces actually are able to pretty easily harm the everyday consumer or rank and file employee because they're invisible. And that disposability can result in really abusive corporate policies. And since the people who provide oversight in these spaces don't understand narcissism, there are few consequences. And even when there is wrongdoing, the CEOs get buyouts and promised severance packages. It means that a person who did some really bad things walk off with enough money to keep a small town going for a few years. It's really not a punishment. Whenever those who are the decision makers do not get it, they end up engaging in decision making that's sort of enabling and that further gaslights the victims and sets the narcissist up to just repeat their behavior. Because ultimately, for the narcissistic person, there is rarely any kind of meaningful consequence. All of this means that we over and over again see a reperpetration of all kinds of bad behavior, which re-traumatizes the survivors in these experiences as well. When the decision makers don't get it, it often means that a situation has to end up in a horrific ending. People dying, companies getting shut down, and hundreds of people or thousands of people getting laid off, crimes being committed, and people's lives getting destroyed before the decision makers see it and say, "Oh my goodness, what a tragic ending," rather than them taking the time and learning how narcissism works in the first place and making better decisions in terms of understanding how those personality styles work. I know I've said this before, I even did another video on this idea that narcissism is not against the law. But in many professional settings, offensive behavior can be addressed. And because decision makers often hold privilege, they're often more protected against these toxic patterns than the rest of us in these systems. So they're able to take a naive stance and say, well, it sure seems like everyone around here is getting along. It's for this reason I do believe that training on narcissism should be required training for people in just about every professional setting there is. It's not warm and fuzzy kinds of conversations, but giving the benefit of the doubt to harmful people over and over again only benefits those who harm and harm just about everyone they meet. So the key to keep in mind here is that we're at this interesting juncture where the majority of people who hold the power and are powerful decision makers, either they get this and don't want to admit it, or they don't get it, or they don't want to get it because to get it means to integrate a really inconvenient and uncomfortable truth on how things need to be sort of redone. So much of this is also about egocentricity. A lot of people are really self-serving. And when leadership is self-serving, they may pay lip service to saying, well, I'm worried about everyone, but what they're really thinking about is what's going to work for me and what's going to work for my cronies in this organization. What's going to make me look good? What's going to result in me being liked? When the people in positions of power are coming from that self-serving bias, that also blinds them from understanding narcissism. But understanding this means that abuses within an organization could be better understood. Court systems could actually be more responsive. And I'll be frank with you, if we understood, and not we, the powerful people we could understand narcissism, we would actually be in a better position to address things like recidivism. We'd probably be in a better position to identify things like dangerous behavior that's going to turn up or toxic behavior that's going to turn up. Until we wake the hell up and stop thinking that charming and charismatic people are all that and manipulation is just the way of the world, until we get that, these people in positions of power who do not get this are going to keep in place a world, policies, rules, and laws that, while we might try to keep our side of the street clean in terms of narcissism, is all but guaranteeing the dust is always still going to come back and settle and hurt us all. I know anyone listening to me, and I even have my own friends say, for goodness sake, girl, you must think I'm a dog with a bone. You must think I'm tenacious. Perhaps some of you even think I'm obsessed. It's definitely a sort of a joke within my family, with my friends, especially with my kids, who will watch something with me and they'll say, wait for it. And they're just waiting for me to call out the narcissism. So I just try to keep my mouth shut, but I'm like, I see it. My hobby is combing through the news, looking for examples of narcissism. The fact is, it's ubiquitous. And all of you watching this get it, but very few people get it. So why is it so important that people get it? And I actually think it's critically important at this point in history, and even earlier, that people do get this. Because this phenomenon of narcissism, it's bigger than us. It may be that your cheating, lying partner is wrecking your life. But let's face it, even just in your own life, your cheating, lying jerk of a partner is also making other people's lives miserable. I guarantee it. They're not going out in the world spreading sunshine and coming out and being mean to you. And they've likely already left a trail of destruction behind them. These are one-person wrecking crews. Now, when only some people out there understand narcissism, and just about everybody else are still towing the tired party line of second chances, and these folks who are narcissistic are misunderstood, and let's face it, there's always two sides to everything, and maybe you're not giving them a chance, and maybe they didn't mean it that way, and why are you so judgmental that you need to label them? Then the problem is that all of you who actually clearly see and get narcissism, you continue to face the chorus of invalidation. How many people out there finally get clarity on these personality patterns like narcissism and the damage that these personalities have wrought? And then other people say, oh, you don't know what you're talking about. And then they come out with some sort of enabling explanation. And meanwhile, your life, your heart, your psyche, and your soul are in tatters while they enable your abuser. Half of the problem is that a critical mass of people out there actually really and accurately do not understand what narcissism is, and they hold on to this kind of nonsensical misconception that it's self-love and narcissist staring at himself in the mirror. Now you know, you've been watching this channel, it's so much more nuanced than that. It's a toxic, really toxic manifestation of that person's insecurity, the narcissist's insecurity, that results in terrible interpersonal antagonism that does real psychological damage to the people who are in the wake of it, especially when they don't understand it. So when you use the term narcissist with a person who doesn't understand it, they think you are getting yourself all upset about somebody who's just vain and likes to look in a mirror and say, why are you making such a big deal? So what if they like Instagram? You're like, oh, no, this isn't just about Instagram. The mental health profession, frankly, in my estimation, is also guilty. Unfortunately, many in the field were not adequately trained in narcissism and related kinds of personality styles and personality disorders, of the origins of narcissism, the impacts of it, the treatments for it, and most importantly, how to work with survivors, people who've experienced narcissistic abuse. There is often the danger of therapists enabling these patterns and then excusing narcissistic patterns on the basis of the narcissist's life history, and then reperpetrating the pain of the survivors in forums such as couples therapy or family therapy, where everyone is encouraged to sort of see the world from the narcissist's point of view. We're all already doing that 24/7, aren't we? And if we take all of this understanding into other areas like human resources or public policy, it becomes even more important. This all, for me, kind of circles back to that good old forgiveness debate. You all know how I feel about forgiving a narcissist. Now, some people, healthy people, actually benefit and grow from forgiveness. In fact, sometimes there was just carelessness, and then the person was like, oh my goodness, and they take that forgiveness and they make a real commitment to growth, and you forgive them, and in more than a few cases, it becomes better. That's not going to happen with narcissism. For people with narcissistic personality styles, and again, I've said it before and I'm going to say it here, forgiveness is just a big neon sign saying, hey, there's an enabler here, and you can get away with anything you want because I'm going to forgive you. So now, apply this to other systems, not just people, but systems that can actually issue real consequences. These can be legal systems, justice systems, employment systems, the rules of organizations of all kinds. Always remember that in the absence of consequences, narcissists are going to keep breaking the rules or even in the laws. Let's face it, for a lot of narcissists, even when there are consequences, they will keep breaking those rules. And because so many people and systems out there do not understand narcissism, many people out there still think they can reason with narcissists. They think they can just give them a warning letter, or just a little warning, or a silly, meaningless financial penalty. Not going to work. In as litigious a society as we currently live, especially in the United States, people are often afraid to give real consequences to narcissists because they're concerned about lawsuits. And you know what? It's a very reasonable fear, because narcissists love suing other people and they love to threaten to sue other people. It's like their language. And because narcissistic people are so entitled, they really tend to flip out when rules are applied to them. They really feel like rules are for other people. All of these systems keep enabling narcissists because they rarely face consequences. And whether that's because of a population-wide naivete, because people think the narcissist will change, or a grandiosity, because people think that I'm the one who could change this narcissist. That is grandiose. Or there's fear, because so many people, and reasonably so, are afraid that the narcissist will retaliate. But by not understanding narcissism, it makes all of this so much worse. What ends up happening is that the narcissist's behavior often escalates and just keeps building and building. They break rules on a larger and larger scale. Perhaps they even break laws. So it's almost like a tantruming child. those of you who've spent time with kids. The tantruming a child will try to get 1 glass of water, then they'll get 3 glasses of water, then they'll want to stay up too late, and then they'll want 3 stories. Well, just like that child, the narcissist just keeps pushing the envelope. But with adult narcissists, this isn't just about a glass of water at bedtime. This can escalate to the point of danger. The grandiosity, their need for dominance and power, and the power they do get, the narcissist gets by pushing the envelope all the time, and their incapacity to see the consequences of their behavior, or frankly, even care about the consequences if they don't really affect them that much, means that a person who's narcissistic is going to keep pushing until there is no choice but to place a far more extreme penalty on that person: arrest, prison, massive fines, loss of their credentials. And then the narcissist will literally look shocked, like, what? Why is everyone so mad at me? Again, they look like that tantruming child when that tantruming child gets a real consequence. And then the narcissist will often fall into a place of shame, of pathetic, groveling apologies, of ridiculous justifications. I know. Okay, I went a little too far this time. I know I should have listened to you, but I've been so stressed lately. Or they take the victimized stance. Everyone's out to get me, popular one for them. Or they double down and just continue to gaslight and deny. Listen, I get this. I get this. Obviously, I get narcissism. If you're watching this YouTube channel, odds are you get it as well. But sadly, lots of the decision makers out there who make the big decisions that affect all of us do not get this. This idea of a second chance or the benefit of the doubt actually makes the narcissist worse, whereas a second chance for a healthy person is often embraced as a gift, and it can actually result in permanent behavioral change. Not all second chances are created equal, are they? And if we can train people to get it, then we can train people to become more judicious and more discerning on how they give out their second chances and how they give out their benefit of the doubt, and to look at these behaviors as patterns and not one-offs, and to recognize that these patterns are simply just not that amenable to change. It is also important that we understand these patterns so we stop personalizing them. The challenge is that for too many people, their first narcissist was their parent. So it was personal, because your entire reality is skewed if you have a narcissistic parent. If we actually talked about it, we talked about narcissism in school, and with greater access to forums for people to talk about these toxic patterns, then people may be a little bit less likely to make the other person's toxic behavior about themselves, but rather to recognize that it's a reflection of the person who is doing the behavior and not the person who's receiving the behavior. All of us who have experienced narcissistic abuse are so used to saying, oh, maybe it was me, or I'm sure that was my fault. Partly this happens because when we were children will often take on the responsibility for the bad behavior of adults as a means of feeling safe in the world around them. They don't want to think that the adults are out to lunch. It's easier for them to blame themselves. It gives them control. Listen carefully to what I'm about to say. Survivors of narcissistic abuse tend to take responsibility for all of the bad behavior in the relationship over time. That's what happens, and that's its own form of trauma. When you start believing that you're the one who did bad things, it really takes a psychological toll on you, especially when you didn't. We must understand these narcissistic relational cycles so that people stop blaming themselves for other people's toxic behavior. By all means, you need to own your own stuff, but don't take responsibility for other people's. Now let's face it, the word narcissism is misused and misdefined all the time. Narcissism has absolutely nothing to do with self-love, but it's really all about self-loathing. Yeah, narcissists may be superficial and vain. It's a way for them to sort of be strong in their face of their insecurity. But when we only focus on the superficial vain parts, the danger of the brooding insecurity they have gets glossed over. And people and systems and countries who are experiencing narcissistic abuse, their experiences get minimized. Oh, come on now. Narcissism, I don't know what you're talking about. He just loves hearing his own voice. Or, don't worry, his bark is worse than his bite. Or, oh, she just likes the attention. Don't take her so seriously. No, it's not that simple. This is much more serious than a sort of lame person who needs all their validation through social media. This isn't that. This is a person who has no problem bulldozing another person's soul to make themselves feel better. This isn't just that vapid, superficial person. Frankly, I don't know the answer to all of this. I'm doing my part. When I got into this work many years ago, before people were even really talking about this, I felt so demoralized. Because in my own work, I could see it proliferating in my clinical practice and research and all of that. I was seeing more and more people being affected by it. And then I was witnessing that it was seeping into governments, into workplaces, into media, and obviously into all of our individual lives. And because it went into those bigger structures, it actually emboldened it in narcissistic individuals. When the individual narcissists who were wreaking havoc on their families, partners, friends, and coworkers saw that this kind of unhinged, conflictual, contemptuous, rageful, entitled, oppositional, cold, invalidating, manipulative, attention-seeking behavior was normalized in the behavior of leaders, in the media, and in the people who hold the big, loud megaphones, the platforms, and the mic, it really became permission for this kind of toxic behavior to sustain. Each of us can address this when we stop enabling. We stop with the benefit of the doubt and second chance and he didn't mean that. We stop with the justifications and we take a step back and we recognize that abuse is abuse, regardless of the abuser's backstory. I write books, I make videos, I work with clients, I do the work I can. I ain't going to be the one who changes world governments, who changes the global support of narcissism we see. My only hope and my only goal is to open as many eyes as I can and to support the healing of as many people as I can. I have worked with clients who are in their 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s who say, I don't understand this. I've never heard of this narcissism thing, as they painfully attempt to extricate themselves from toxic family systems, long-term toxic marriages, abusive adult children, and they sadly reflect on a lifetime that would have been different had they known what this was and that it wouldn't change. I'm a very big believer that it's never too late to clean out the difficult people from your life. But I acknowledge that the regret of learning about all of this and how it works later in life can sting in a very unique way. Too many people learn about narcissism after they were hurt. Many of you got into this channel or started watching this channel because you got burned, you got hurt, you got manipulated, or you got blindsided. The next step for you is to become a better gatekeeper. If you are watching this channel already, you get it. Even if you just get it a little and you're a beginner in your journey, you get it a little bit. Narcissists get enabled. They get their power, their energy, and their strength by a lifetime of second chances and more people letting them in. And the buck can actually stop with you. You won't be popular if you're the gatekeeper, but hopefully you will be sane. This conversation has never been more important than it is right now, whether it's from the perspective of leadership, government, economics, and obviously mental health. But most importantly, what's happening in your individual relationship may actually be a manifestation, a crucible of sorts, of the mess that narcissism has made of our world. Thanks again.